Thanks for checking out this highlight from Epic Loot Radio. If you want to see the full podcast after the highlight, just check the top link in the description for more.
Sure. So, I mean, this article that came out this morning, I think it was this morning, is a Jason Schreier article, formerly of Kotaku, moved over to Bloomberg, and did kind of one of his usual expose-type pieces at one of these big companies. The article is actually framed a little bit out of what I wound up covering in the video and what I think is the more important part of the story. But he framed this story as there was a small group of developers, I think it was 30 or so people, that wanted to make video games rather than just supporting the other studios at Sony. They went and they started making a Last of Us remake. Now, Last of Us only came out in 2013. It had already been remastered on PlayStation 4. We could talk about that as just a decision. But this whole story is framed as Sony killed it. Sony brought it over to Naughty Dog. Naughty Dog took over. There are only these star companies that Sony uses. And Sony is only interested in blockbusters. They aren't interested in middling stuff. There's a big section of the article that talks about them essentially squashing Sony Japan. And what I did, the thumbnail and my title of my video, which is Are the Glory Days of Sony Days Gone?
Masterful. It was masterful thumbnail, by the way.
I love puns. If you're a fan of Virtual Legality, or if you visit me over there, half the titles are puns. SEO hates it, but I love them too much to give them up. The middle section was about also Sony Bend, who, if you don't know Bend Studios, they've been around since basically the beginning of PlayStation. I mean, these are the Siphon Filter guys. And they wound up putting out Days Gone in 2019, which was, to me, it was one of my favorite games of 2019. I didn't wind up having the technical issues that some of the reviewers did. And I understand that. I understand giving bad reviews to things that have technical issues that, I don't know, crash during launch week the whole time. We could talk about that as well for some game.
Another game maybe in the show. I don't know.
Yeah, who knows? It could come up. And so I loved it. And they were apparently pitching a sequel. And Sony said, no sequel. It wasn't profitable enough. Days Gone was profitable. It had big sales in 2019, even though it wasn't a critically acclaimed game in that year. They said no, and what they did was they said, you're going to make multiplayer, which is unspecified in the article. Sounded like it was that you're going to help Naughty Dog do The Last of Us multiplayer. You're going to make and you're going to make another Uncharted.
Yeah.
And what we knew last year, but what we didn't really know in terms of context until this morning, was that the main creative forces at Bend left unceremoniously. Didn't really announce it. Basically tweeted it out later on. Said, "Oh yeah, we left." And this was the writer and director for everything that Bend had ever made. These were the main creative forces. And so the article really kind of then focuses back on the question of this small group that was making Last of Us. And I wasn't that interested in that. What I was interested in was that when you take this down, when you put this all together, you have the main talent leaving from Bend. You've already had talent drain from places like London. You've had Japan killed. And you do have right now a slate for the Sony PlayStation that's effectively another Horizon, another God of War, another Spider-Man, another Uncharted, Last of Us being remade. So the third Last of Us release in 10 years for that game. Mm-hmm. And you look at it, and for me, you say, this does wind up feeling like the really bad days of Xbox, where it was just Forza and Halo and Gears of War, and just kind of a stagnancy. And I don't want to see that. And I love Sony. And I love all these companies. They all make games that I enjoy. But I look at that and say, there's a real problem there. You're many steps removed from the variety that I loved. And so I ended that video with looking at a Sean Layden speech from E3 2014, where he was talking about like Vib Ribbon and saying it doesn't matter that it doesn't sell 1 million because this is ambition and this is giving gamers new concepts and new ideas. And one of these things will grow. That's how you build your garden. That's how you make a small studio into a big studio. And I said that is currently not the focus at Sony, regardless of how you feel about Jason Schreier and some of the other stuff that he puts in terms of the framing. The actual facts on the ground that we can tell from Japan and Bend and things do suggest that Sony is consolidating into these specific intellectual properties that I love. I'll enjoy those games, but it will be sequels and tentpoles and very much not as exciting as some of the random stuff, like an Outriders, which is a Square Enix game, but came out of nowhere for me, that comes out and is exciting.
I want to go to Rory, because you obviously we kept you in the dark. You said, "What's going on?" And I said, "We're going to break the news to you." And your expression in the corner, I think, tells it all. But I want to get your reaction to this and let you speak.
I mean, I'm I'm super disappointed because, like, for starters, like I said in the pre-show, for full disclosure, like I work closely with Sony in Portugal. They're super cool with me. They even send me a PS5. Full disclosure again, on release date, so that I could cover the console and play Demon Souls and do all of this other stuff. But it's like Sony has definitely been moving in a direction that, in a lot of ways, is disappointing. I feel like ever since they swapped their headquarters to California, because they used to be headquartered in Japan, I don't know exactly where, and then they swapped the headquarters to California, and they've been making these weird decisions, like really quirky censorship things in Japanese games and demanding more and more censorship stuff. Because, like, a lot of Japanese games like having girls in skimpy clothes and stuff like that on their video games. And in a lot of ways, there is a demographic for those types of video games. Whether you like it or not, it's besides the point. And Sony started cracking down on that. That was like the first time that I was like, wow, what are you guys doing? This Sony Japan stuff, I have not been following it, but Sony Japan is also one of my favorite studios. They've done amazing things with Sony, like Soul Sacrifice, which is a game that most people have never even heard of, potentially one of the best games ever made. Demon Souls was originally also came by possibly by Sony Japan. Bloodborne also by Sony Japan. And the fact that they just seem to be distancing themselves from that and going after everything that Naughty Dog does. Like, look, I love Uncharted. Uncharted's a really fun game. I really like playing it. I like the original Last of Us. I didn't like the sequel to Last of Us as much. Like, I had a lot of issues with the way that story was told. I still played through the game and I was like, okay, there are parts of it that I like, but there's a lot of it that I didn't like. And it just seems like if that's the direction that they're constantly moving, it's a little bit sad, because ultimately there wouldn't be a Horizon Zero Dawn without them taking chances. Because the studio that did Horizon Zero Dawn is the same studio that was doing what's the name of the game that they would Killzone. It's the Killzone studio. All they could do before is Killzone, and then suddenly the studio came out of nowhere, Horizon Zero Dawn, and it was one of my favorite games there. I was like, this game's amazing. It's awesome. And it was very much an experimental game where they did a lot of interesting things. And they told probably the best story that was told in video games that year with Horizon Zero Dawn. So the fact that they seem to be going against, experimental stuff is very, very sad. And specifically with the example of Days Gone, because Days Gone, I have this story that happened with me. It was so weird because I went to a preview event for Days Gone and I got to play it early. And I played a little bit of it, and I hated it. I thought the game was terrible. Like, the PR person for Sony came up to me when I was done playing, and he was like, "So what'd you think of it?" And I was like, "Really? I hated it. I thought it was atrocious. Like, it was really bad." But when the final game came out, I actually really enjoyed it. So I played through the whole thing. Loved Days Gone. I thought it was amazing, and to hear that the studio that made that story and made that gameplay just kind of like left because they didn't approve the next game that they wanted to do sucks, because there's a tremendous amount of churn in this industry when it comes to talent. Like, we're burning through talent at an alarming rate. We're constantly killing off studios because people just don't accept the risky ideas. And this is terrible for the industry as a whole. So I hope that they can kind of like, take a couple of more chances and accept some more Japanese games and don't be so much on top with this censorship nonsense. Because a lot of the games that we're playing nowadays are for adults. Like, who cares if there's gore and violence or, skimpy clothing or whatever? The important thing is that the parents are aware of what the rating of the game is. And then it's the parents' decision whether or not you're going to let your kids play GTA or whatever else comes out.
Now, I want to go to the panel. I do want to come back to Chaos and let him speak on this. But Paul asks, not to throw names out there, but what about things like Returnal, Kenna Bridge of Spirits, Deathloop, etc.? Do you feel that these games don't have legs to compete and become new IP? That's a panel question. Obviously, Deathloop now a Microsoft property, which is going to be a big theme about what...
Are any of those first party? I don't know about Kenna.
No.
Second party.
Returnal is first. Is Returnal second party?
Yeah, they don't own...
Yeah.
They don't own.
They don't own Housemarque,
do they?
No, they don't.
They used to, didn't they? Because I remember most of the Housemarque stuff used to be exclusive to Sony.
I mean, they're close. They're like the Insomniac was before they were bought, I think. But I don't think they're owned by them. Could be wrong.
But what about games not having legs to necessarily become new IP?
I mean, I think Returnal is looking amazing, and I think is Kenna exclusive? Kenna, I don't know if it's exclusive or not, but those are
To
two games that
PlayStation
I'm.
and PC.
Yeah, those are two games that I'm very interested in. Deathloop, not as much, but Kenna and Returnal, I think, are looking amazing, and I think they definitely have legs. Particularly both of them. Really, I'm super curious to check them out.
For me, it's Kenna. I'm interested in Kenna, but Returnal and Deathloop are completely off my radar. I just don't like the way they play out.
So
I don't like how Deathloop looks either, but I do have a certain amount of trust in Arcane. I have liked almost all their output.
So essentially, Chaos. Like, what are your thoughts about essentially this news with PlayStation focusing primarily on blockbusters? Do you have any sway one way or the other?
It kind of reminds you of the time when the PS2 was hitting the strongest. It was coming out with all these new IPs, all these new franchises, and it was hitting it on every front. It was just destroying it. Then the PlayStation 3 came along, and it was just sequels of the blockbusters, and it failed quite drastically. And when they went to the PS4, they started pumping out that new IP. It just seems like the same cycle is happening again. I agree with a lot of what was said. I think it's really disappointing that they are going down this route and they haven't learned from it, because though the PS3 was successful in terms of sales, the overall consensus that I remember at the time was that the 360 just had better games because the PS3 was just churning out sequels and people wanted more. And it just seems like since the PS5 has come out, that is all I'm seeing as being highlighted. And at present, I'm really disappointed in picking one up. I mean, I picked one up at launch as well as my Series X. And, outside of Genshin Impact, I don't use my PS5 for anything else.
My favorite thing on the PlayStation 5 is their little free Astrobot game.
Yeah.
I'm not even kidding.
I mean, there's just nothing there. I mean, with the Series X, at least, I've got Game Pass and everything, to go with it. And I could just jump into any game on there that I want to, because it's just the Netflix of catalog of games. I can jump into it 30 minutes, half an hour, an hour, and play. But when it comes to the PS5, I think the whole censorship thing is really just silly. You don't associate that with, the PlayStation brand. You've got a lot of games that, sell on the fan service, like Rurikon was saying. And that is a big part of like some of the JRPGs that are there. And I remember one game that had like a sandstorm. I think it might have been Atelier. I can't remember, but it's on the Switch and the PlayStation. And because of the whole censoring of it, people just went over to the Switch and bought the Switch version. And I think this is just a really, really bad decision. And since it's gone to America, it's just one bad decision after bad. But it looks like they're just trying to restructure everything to their way. But what they're missing is that the old way worked. You don't need to fix something that isn't broken. But they're just trying to put it into their way. And it's backfiring. And, it's a shame because I think the PlayStation brand is very strong. It's got solid games. But just going after blockbusters that likely will appear on PC in what? A year's time?
We know they're going to appear
or 2 years' time.
Sony's already announced that they're coming to PC.
At that point, it's not enough.
I do think that it is a little bit unfair on the Game Pass thing and saying like there's nothing new on PlayStation 5 and yet we have all these things on Game Pass. It's not like a lot of the stuff that is on Game Pass is new. It's like you have access to a huge library of games, yes, but they're not necessarily new games that have just like came out recently or something like that. You now have Outriders that came to Game Pass, which is awesome. That is great. But like even on the PlayStation, there's like a smaller version of that as well, which is like if you have PlayStation Plus, which is kind of the same thing. In order to get Game Pass, you also need to pay a subscription. They give you like access to some of the best blockbusters that came to the PS4, which is in a way similar to Game Pass. What they don't have is the quantity of games, but you have stuff like Bloodborne on there. I think Horizon, Persona 5. There's a bunch of them. I don't remember all of the games that are on there, but you get all of those when you get the PS5 with PlayStation Plus. And there's still some really good games that they launched with, like Demon Souls is amazing. Miles Morales, I think, is also really good. and there's more stuff on there. The multiplayer stuff is the stuff that I don't gel with as much. So like Destruction All Stars came out there, and I was like, yeah, like I played it for like, I don't know, 1-2 hours and then never touched it again.
Yeah, pretty much.
Now
it's like
Free helps with
go
that.
for it.
I got a question for the panel here because especially I want to go to Rich first when I ask this, but Chaos brought up something, especially about as it relates to the 360 era. One of the things that was really prominent was Microsoft open its checkbook, and it just said, go spend money here, go spend money here, go spend money here. And it really caught Sony off guard. Like when you look at the PlayStation 2, how strong it was, ended up being a weakness of the PS3. When you look at from a development and technological standpoint, Japanese developers took longer to jump into the era of HD gaming where Microsoft set that tone. And they set that tone with the only thing that they really have as an advantage, especially at the time, outside of Halo. They didn't even own Gears at the time. That was them working with Epic, and then they eventually bought that IP. So when you look at that and you look at now, both of those things are true. And then you have the success of the PS4 and what happened, the same thing with the PS2. Sony kind of maybe like resting on their laurels. But at the core of it, the way I look at it is that they got completely caught off guard and Microsoft has set a tone. And it's not Game Pass that I think Game Pass is their platform. Like when I talk to Xbox fanboys, and they're all like, Xbox is like, you don't get it. Microsoft doesn't have exclusives. They're on the cloud, they're on PC, and they're on their console. They say play whatever. We don't care, but be a part of Game Pass. Like that's their platform, and that's the Netflix of games, right? So beyond that, that debate that I have with Xbox fanboys, because they still view the hardware as kind of the key thing. Microsoft doesn't do that. Like they're about that as a service. So Microsoft's opening its floodgates. It's spending its money. It doesn't need to be profitable. It's got the whole backing of Microsoft. It's a war of attrition. Like there's like in this game, it is a clear contrast. But what I think is the clear defining feature of this generation that is so small and it costs nobody nothing is smart delivery. When you look at the news of the PlayStation and the Now, even with the PS5 version of the beta, I see chat talking about the Final Fantasy XIV beta is coming. It's a separate client. Now, 14 isn't on Xbox, so that's a hard one to do a direct compare on. But everything else we see is that Microsoft just handles it. You buy the game, you have this legacy. The fact that I've got Xbox One, Xbox 360, Xbox or OG as a part of this library, and then you hear news this Vita store shutting down, PS3 store shutting down, the migration of your game, that they like, it just feels like I just say like that is a contrast to what Sony's doing. It's that subtle in the back of your mind, like, okay, somebody's like, well, you own that game on PlayStation. I was like, what happens if you have to re-download it? It's gone. Yeah. And then on Xbox it says it's yours. Like it's like a whole like that's the game changer. Rory,
let's see, counterpoint here. Yeah. And that is, I'm someone that one of the things that I always say whenever people talk to me about Game Pass, I'm like, dude, I think it's a fantastic value thing for someone who's starting out, and maybe you don't have a huge catalog of games to play and you're just starting out. It's a huge value proposition, period. Like there's no denying that. But I don't like consuming my games the same way that I consume Netflix. Mm-hmm. I consume Netflix as like throwaway content, right? Like I'll watch it and forget about it, maybe rewatch it at some point, and if it's gone, I don't care. Right. Games is something different. So like I'll play a video game, and if I really, really like it, I want to know that if I feel like playing that game again, it's going to be there. Right. And that is not always the case when it comes to Game Pass or any other thing that you do, because you can't assure that you have those licenses forever. That's just the way that it works.
Game Pass lets you purchase the games as well at a discount, meaning you have that you have that experience, and then if you want to,
but you have to buy it
if it's a non-Microsoft first party, which at some point there might just be Microsoft first party.
Yeah, exactly. But like, for instance, not so long ago, Final Fantasy 15 got thrown out of the Game Pass. Mm-hmm. So it's like, imagine I played Final Fantasy 15, then I want to play it again. It's like, oh, well, now it's gone. It's not in the service anymore. That's one of the reasons why I personally don't like things like Game Pass. I like owning the games that I want to play, right? Mm-hmm. So that's kind of like the counterpoint to that whole thing about the
Yeah.
stores going away. But the stores going away is terrible. It's atrocious. It's completely indefensible because, like, I've bought things on the PS3 store. I've bought things on the Vita, and I feel like the Vita got done dirty so bad.
Oh, it did.
Because the Vita after the Vita died in the West, essentially, because it died like a long time ago. The Vita had a huge lifespan still in Japan. It was still flourishing no, not anymore. Now it's kind of dead in Japan as well. But like it was flourishing in Japan for a long time after it was dead in the West. And it was super disappointing because you had this console that had a beautiful OLED screen. It played amazingly, had dual analogs. It was just a fantastic console all around. And they just they abandoned it. I was like, what do you mean? It was terrible. Like, yeah.
I want to go to Rich. What are your
Sure.
thoughts?
Well, I like Game Pass more than some of the other panelists, I think. But I think at the end of the day, when we're talking about these kinds of issues, I don't know that Sony isn't taking the safe play for what they are seeing right now. So I talk about this in my videos. I talk about it in Virtual Legality a lot. But putting all your money in the blockbusters that have historically succeeded is kind of the CFO, accountant, financial safety valve. Look, this is what we can justify the most of. This is what we think we are going to get based on historical ROI. But what it ignores is kind of the growth proposition, that growing of smaller studios, growing of smaller ideas, making sure that you continue to make your garden rather than just taking the 5 flowers that work for you and keep selling them until they're dead, right? This is Activision selling Guitar Hero until they couldn't sell Guitar Hero anymore. This is all of those kinds of consolidated efforts. And I don't want anybody to think that I'm not going to enjoy the new Ratchet and Clank. I just feel like I've already played it, or that I'm not going to like God of War, but sequels are sequels. And so I think Xbox has a lot to prove for itself.
Yeah.
That essentially they're getting early credit, I would say, for some of the moves that they've made when they haven't yet had the actual garden grow that we think they will, because of all they've bought. And we think Ninja Theory will make some cool stuff. And we think Bethesda's, I don't know, probably halfway through making Starfield a decade in. We don't know. And that game will come out, and Microsoft will get credit for it. And that'll be great. But I think when you started all this, you asked, was this a similar situation to Microsoft throwing money at the second or third generation, depending on which side you're counting from? And I think it is. I think the hidden secret behind the video game industry since Microsoft decided to enter has always been, if they ever decide to throw their entire pocketbook at this thing, there's no fighting them on money.
Right.
I think one of the things I try to remind people of is you think of Microsoft and Sony as rivals, as competitors. Microsoft gaming, sure. But if Microsoft itself and its Azure servers and its Windows sales and the entirety of the company ever just decides, hey, yeah, we can spend $7 billion today. Sure, go nuts, Phil. Then Sony can't fight that. Nintendo can't fight that. And Nintendo has been operating in its own ecosystem for a long time. Yeah. Sony's trying to find that ecosystem too, because there's no winning. Microsoft could buy EA and Activision tomorrow and not even hit their bottom line. So it's really PlayStation and Sony trying to figure out what works for them. And I don't blame them, but I think this isn't what will work for them long term. It will work for them short term. People play Spider-Man 2. Miles Morales was a lot of fun. Insomniac's hitting on all cylinders. They'll play it. Herman is going to get his games, whether it's Killzones or Robot Dinosaurs. He's in charge now. Guerrilla's going to get to make what they want to make. But you start running talent out and you say censorship issues. Absolutely. You have Japan not being as focused, and you're going to try to play Microsoft in their own game. They're going to get more and more Western audiences. They're going to buy the studios that they want. And I don't think it's the right call. It doesn't mean I don't still love Sony. They continue to make some good deals, but I think that Microsoft is ascendant, and overall, I think that's a good thing. I've always liked, two heavy hitters that encourage each other to spend money, to grow, to do all these things. Competition is great. But right this second, that article from this morning, looking at specifically Sony Bend, I think was the nexus point for like how this all kind of coalesced in my brain, why I did a video. I don't love what Sony's perspective for at least the first, let's say, 3 years of PlayStation 5 looks like as of right now.
So I want to go to Chaos kind of for a final thought, unless we're like, but we'll wrap up this this subject here.
Sure.
But let's start with Chaos because I know you've got a thought. Go ahead.
So just piggybacking off what we just said, and this kind of goes over a bit of what you said earlier, but it's something Phil said, I think maybe a year or so ago, when they asked him, do you see PlayStation as your rival? And he said, no, I see Amazon and Google
Apple.
as...
Yeah.
He said Amazon and Google as my rival because home consoles are one thing, but the cloud is another, and that is where the real competition is.
Mhm.
You may reach 100 million at home, but you've got billions in the cloud, and that is the play that they're looking for. So I don't see this rivalry anymore. They've just got two completely different target audiences. Microsoft wants everyone, whereas Sony wants the home entertainment.
And see, that's one of the reasons why I still prefer the PlayStation. It's because like that's what I want. And the thing is, I'm a dinosaur. When you think about the things that it's true. When you think about the things that I like, I'm a dinosaur. I like physical media. I want that experience of having physical media. I want a game that I can hold in my hand. Even though it's worthless nowadays because like, every game comes with a day one patch, and when they turn the servers off, it doesn't friggin' matter. Like if I buy the physical edition of Outriders 10 years from now, it's probably going to be worthless unless the servers are still on. Who knows if they will be? I mean, I think Destiny 1 still has its servers on, but who knows for how long those are going to be on, right? And when that stuff turns off, it's gone. It's gone forever. So I'm the kind of guy that's like, I want that physical media that will hopefully last the test of time. But I did want to bring up one more thing, which is I think is very important, which was the smart delivery thing.
Mm-hmm.
That is one thing that when I first booted up the PS5 and I started installing games on it, I was like, oh my God.
Yeah, I hear that. Yeah.
So what happened to me was they sent me codes for Miles Morales. So I installed Miles Morales, and when I put the code in, that thing installed the PS5 version and the PS4 version in my PS5 console. And I was like, what are you doing? Why would I want the PS4 version of this game installed on my PlayStation 5? There's literally no reason.
It'll still do that. You go into the store, you buy a digital version, it'll have the list of the copies
it'll still do it?
that it have. And if the name is long enough, you won't necessarily be able to tell which one is which because it's the parenthetical at the end. And then you have to look at the little box in the icon. And there's no question that smart delivery is great. The one thing I will say on smart delivery, regardless of whether or not you're even in the Microsoft ecosystem or you love it, what it creates for Sony are these terrible news items and tweets and things.
Yeah.
Every single time there's a multi-platform release, like Marvel's Avengers comes out with its PlayStation 5 version. Xbox just says, yep, go play it. And then everybody does a small news article that's about how you have to bring your Avengers 4 save over to Avengers 5. And it's a ridiculous process. And that's going to happen every time. Because that's the way the system is.
The thing is also that is on a lot of the times that is also on the publishers themselves though, because the publishers can decide to have, okay, now for this thing, I'm going to have like a special edition. Like in the case of Capcom, they did Devil May Cry 5 special edition. I believe that also was for the Series X. So it's like smart delivery doesn't fix that. It's like if you want the Series X version of the special edition, you still have to buy it. It's not like you can just, smart delivery, give me the best version.
Publishers opt into smart delivery
developers.
Too. Yeah, they opt in.
Sure.
And so
it's on the publishers, but let's just say that Microsoft have a better handle on the smart delivery thing, and I think that is something that Sony definitely needs to learn because when I install the version of a game, if you have the PS5 version, it's not going to cost me more money to get the PS5 version. Why would I ever want to install the PS4 version? It's dumb.
All right. At the end of the day, one of the things that I want is I want a strong Sony. I want a strong Microsoft. I want strong companies because if they're fighting for our attention, they're spending money, and that overall makes it ideally a better playing field for gamers or developers at the end. Like, right now the news that keeps coming out, there was a fear that Game Pass was bad for developers, and all the developers coming out and going like, no, we love this. Like this is. Go ahead, Rich. You gotta face.
No, I agree. And everything you're seeing about news and Game Pass and interaction, you see Outriders in the top 5. Game Pass clearly doesn't like just squash delivery of video games like I think some had feared when it was announced as a concept.
Yeah.
The one thing I continue to say when I make appearances like this and when I do it in my own videos is Microsoft is still spending bundles of money on Game Pass and on bringing things into Game Pass. And the math behind what that contract looks like is still, as described, bespoke, that they're figuring out exactly what amount of money to give each developer and publisher. And I think there is still, just the way these new models work, there's still a couple of years left to see whether it works for everybody, to see whether it works for Microsoft, to see whether it works for Square Enix or Rockstar or whoever's put things in there for small periods of time. And so the only caution I have is we're still at the, okay, if you got in on any of their promotional time periods, you're on Game Pass for $1 for 3 years or whatever it is. You're still in a place where Xbox doesn't care about, what did Phil say? They're not trying to profit off of it yet. So they're reinvesting every dollar into buying more video games. That's not going to last forever.
Right.
And there is a move eventually that you see in Netflix or Disney Plus or Hulu or anything else where you're going to try to flip it over into, okay, we've got 100 million eyeballs and now we're going to try to monetize it. And so I think it'll go okay. I think Game Pass is a tremendous value. I consider it, we've heard a couple people talk about Game Pass on this episode. I consider it my favorite place to go and play indie games I would never buy separately. Mm-hmm. That's a great value to me. And I've enjoyed a ton of games that I've played in it that way. But what it looks like 3 or even 5 years from now might be considerably different. I don't know whether they buy an Outriders at that point in time, or whether they buy an MLB The Show. It depends, and it's just a little early. And this is just the nature of business models. There's nothing Xbox is doing wrong. Just in terms of analysis, yes, you see that they are getting the interactions. You're getting the sales in other places. I think Outriders really kind of rode a wave of even being announced for Game Pass onto places like Steam. But it's still an open question to me, looking at it as to whether all the math is going to work out long term, because Xbox is spending a lot of money on it right now.
All right. I think that's great. And thanks, Kaz, also for your comment. The cloud is the end game for game developers. Playing Outriders on my phone. If Game Pass lets me do that, Team Xbox, Sony doesn't seem to understand that. And that's another pocket option. And I know, like, I do a lot of cloud gaming because my PC can't handle it. Rory, definitely not a fan in that regards.
It costs like, what, £130 in the UK to sign up to a year's worth of Game Pass, right? If you're buying it legitimately, it's £130. That's almost the price of 2 games. So if you play 2 day one release games that are AAA, that are released by the publisher, you've already made your money back. Everything else outside of that, you're playing essentially for free.
As long as
if that game is coming off,
right? And it's the transparency.
But even then, like most games I consume, unless they're looter shooter or live service games, I usually spend 100 hours, 200 hours, then I'll put it down. If it's a single player focused game, I don't replay those games. They're just one-time deals for me most of the time because I just don't have the time.
Sure.
But like you were saying with the indie games and other games that I wouldn't have normally played, it gives me that access to go and play those. When Gears of War first came out, that was when I first signed up to Game Pass. It cost me £1.
Yeah.
And I played a £45 game at the time for £1. And, then I signed up for the whole year. And we've got at least £500-600 worth of value from that.
Sure.
Easy. And if there's a game at that point where it's coming off the system and I really want to play it, I'm okay paying that extra bit of money and buying it because I've got so much more value in return anyway.
Sure.
So that is the way I see it. So if it is coming off, fine. It's not like it's coming off the actual platform.
Right.
And they give you like a 30% discount to actually pick it up before it's off the Game Pass anyway. So if you really want it, it's still a win-win for me.
Yeah, I think that's what a lot of people are finding. But, well, I mean, Rich is right. Like, in 5 years, who knows what we'll see. So, as always, guys, just guard your hearts and your wallets and spend your money as best as you can. Now, I want to say, if you guys are still with us, or if you're watching later on Ginger Prime, be sure to hit that like button. That's the best way you can say thanks if you're enjoying the content. Also, be sure to subscribe to all these gentlemen. They are fantastic. Each of them, I mean, they're seriously some of the best. They keep me entertained while I have to program at work and not play video games. So I do appreciate you guys for making content that I enjoy. So I hope that you really enjoyed that highlight, and I hope that you check out the full podcast. Again, link is in the description. Thanks for being here, and hope you have a fantastic day, you wonderful, beautiful individual.